Welcome to the Call to Defend podcast, which is, of course, your ultimate source of joy. I'm Caleb Elliott, and this is Josh Davis sitting across from me. Josh, how are you?
Doing well. This was a fun one. This is a word study that, I knew it was going to be a lot of words. And it was just kind of funny because I pulled up an ESV. I was like, all right, I'm just going to pull up one of the common translations. So I took the ESV out and I looked up, all right, how many times is the English word joy used? If I were to do it like most laymen do word studies, I kind of trace the English word. It's like, okay, 139 times. Okay, that was around where I was expecting it to be. Then I looked at the Hebrew word specifically. And let's just say like even one of those words was 20 words more than just a translation. So you take that and add all the other add-ons, you're looking at more like probably somewhere in the 500s of like words related to joy, rejoice, glad tidings, and all those things.
And that's just Hebrew.
That is just the Hebrew. And so I had a good kick out of that when I was looking through it. I was like, dang, that's a lot. But we're not going to go through all of those, or else this would be our longest series ever, because we'd be going through 500 plus variants plus the New Testament.
I don't know how long it would actually necessarily take, because I feel like a lot of them would just be the same repeated, like, have great joy. There is great joy.
Yeah.
The people had great joy. I feel like that would kind of be most of them. So
it would be probably a good chunk. But for instance, if I pull up in my Logos, so there is at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, about 20-ish different Hebrew words, and that's including like different morphologies. So taking a word and in its root and you add an extra vowel to it, or you change its tense or something like that, and it therefore changes if it's a verb or a noun or an adjective, and you're looking at like 20-ish different words. The most popular one, which is the one we're going to mainly trace, we're going to look at two other ones along the way, but we're going to trace the biggest one that most dictionaries I went through were like saying this is the one, and then my graph agreed with that statement. This one, at least in the ESV, again, I'm just looking at this right now in my graph, if you look at this word translated as joy specifically, appears as joy 46 times. However, if we look at the Hebrew word itself, we're at 94 times. And that's not including the other variations with its root. So this specific form is Simcha, and that's the 94 times.
Okay.
But if we look at its shared root, it shares also with Samach, which is 154 usages. And it also is tied to another word, which is Sameach, and that's 21 times.
One more phlegm in there. I think you got enough.
So the way Hebrew roots work is you have typically 3 main consonants, and then you have different vowels that are added to it, or maybe an extra consonant that adds, changes its tense, or its, whether it's a verb or a person, a variety of different options of what it could be. So what we have for its main roots is we have the letter Sin, Mem, and Ket. And so that's where we get those 3. And if you add on the different variations to it, that's where you get the Simcha, Semach, and Sameach. So you have the...
I'm just expecting like your esophagus to just projectile out onto the table.
When I first started doing Hebrew, I really did it really aggressively, and it hurt. And now I've kind of learned to that nice middle spot where you can get it without hurting your throat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess we don't know how they pronounce it. It sounds a little aggressive to me, but perhaps it's a little better over the audio. But, like, for example, I'd say like Simcha, right? Just kind of like that natural flow of it. Especially just, this is a little aside, but learning kind of a little bit of Arabic.
Yeah.
When I was studying Islam, Semitic language tends to sound a little similar. So it's, I'm not trying to criticize you.
I'm basing this off of the different classes I went through, and I mean, they're all English speakers. So like no one, unless they're a true Hebrew, is like, Israelite, can pronounce it as cleanly. And even then, like modern day Hebrew is so drastically different than ancient Hebrew. So like there might be some different pronunciations, like vav or wow. same letter.
It's got to be Vav. I'm firmly in the Vav camp.
Here's the funny thing though. You say that until we say Yahweh. And that's when we put it back as wow.
But that's honestly just because of more the culture that we've grown up in.
Yeah.
Right. So
I go Vav as well. I prefer Vav. Wow kind of annoys me, but what is it's kind of like the upsilon if it was an U or E. And so I listened to there's a Greek word and I want to make sure I was getting it right before your pod's going to touch on it because it's the one that's used in the Septuagint. And it's funny. So you have one that follows the U and one who follows the E in both of them.
Right.
So I got to hear both and it drastically changes even the E's, what we would translate it with an E or the U's. If an E is next to a U, one would be A with the two of them together and one would be U together. So,
they're extremely different. And that's why I think that's so important, but we'll talk about Greek grammar another time.
But it's all to say, I'm not saying I'm great with Hebrew, but I know before I was ruach and I was really aggressive with it. And now it's ruach. It's that.
Yeah, that I think was perfect. That was.
And now I'm trying to get the Simcha a little more aggressive just because it's because there's an H, there's, we have the ket and we have the hey, both near each other, depending on if you have an extended root or you have just a regular SMH or SMCH, I guess, in that point.
Yes, SMH.
SMH,
bro.
I had a friend who one time screwed up and he said SMH my head.
Shaking my head.
I know.
It's like people who say ATM machine.
ATM machine.
Or cheese quesadillas.
That
really
that
drives me up a wall.
Anyways, back on track.
Very off track.
But getting back on track, so within the ESV, you could trace other ones. You might have more than 139 or less 139. It depends on the translation choice they're running with. Sometimes it's just due to the English grammar and the way that plays out, and some of it's due to if they think it's a better choice. There's one spot where there's a word where I understand they choose a word choice, but I'm not totally sold that was the right choice. But given its context, it was a fine choice to run with. We'll get into that though. So Simcha is if you look up in almost any dictionary, that's the one people refer to. Even though it's only 94 out of if you combine all three with the roots, you're looking at well over 200 with the three together, plus it's extended roots. But the shared root, as I mentioned, is the sin, the mem, and the ket. So I'll go give a little definition for each of the three. Rejoicing in Yahweh, or over a saving act of Yahweh.
Okay.
So rejoicing in who he is or rejoicing over something that he has done. So similar, but
but different. You are not what you've done.
Right. And that's not every instance, but as a good number of instances. Also refers to the heart rejoices or is merry. So the inward happiness of a person's feelings. To be merry, to gladden, make someone else merry. To cause to be happy, help to rejoice, give pleasure.
And to think I changed it on my merry and bright shirt before I
so yeah, as I think I mentioned this last episode, is around, I think, the 19th, 20th century time periods where we start to really put a divide between happiness and joy. And I understand why we do that. But for them, they were very interlinked or very connected. It wasn't joy and happy were
right, because ultimately, and we kind of touched on this last time, that happiness spawns from joy. Joy kind of gives you that more upbeat outlook.
Or in this case, we're going to find is that joy, in many of these cases, is the outpouring of that happiness.
Interesting. Okay.
And so they're deeply tied. Sometimes it's the joy that spawns the happy because it's something that they're taking joy in and it's causing them to be happy. And sometimes it's the happiness and joy together that's having an outpouring.
Yeah, it's kind of funny to see that cultural shift, right? Because now we'd almost think of it a little bit as the opposite.
Yeah.
Right, where happiness is the outpouring of joy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny to see the culture shift there.
Yeah, it's this thing where you have a lot of the instances, at least with the Simcha, Semeach, and Samech, they all tie with this outpouring. It starts with this inner feeling that's pouring out in some way. And so it's it's almost like they're kind of you can't truly say you're joyful if there's no outward pouring of it. That it is severely lacking in that definition. It's kind of like the word Shema, which we talked about many times in this channel before. Mm-hmm. So that word also there's no Hebrew word for obey or like responding, but like if you were to see a person getting mugged, I got this example from someone else. If you saw someone getting mugged and you heard it, so you heard something, but you did not respond to it, you did not shema. So you can't say you truly done it. Or if your parents, for instance, told you to go clean your room, but you didn't do it, you did not shema. It is more of a positive response. Like the psalmists are calling out to Yahweh saying, please shema, please listen to us. So they're not just saying, hey, hear our voices. They're saying, hear and respond in kind, in some way to show that you've listened and they help us out.
Kind of that idea of James.
Yes. Yeah. So there's this tie of, there's one of those things like the culture shift where there's a tie. It's like you can't just separate them like we do. We can separate joy and happiness in some way nowadays, at least in our culture. That happiness is a feeling and joy is that outward expression. But for them, the two are one the same thing. They have to be together. And I think that's just kind of interesting. It kind of shows how this is one of the many cultures that didn't separate the inward and the outward, that they were very deeply tied together.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense to me, at least, because they're an oral culture.
Oh yeah, of course.
Right? So we, as a written culture, as a scribal culture, have the benefit of being able to be like esoteric. We can, make delineations and distinctions and minute little things here and there. Whereas they were like, yes, I'll say the spoken word was much more significant to them. They require like a little bit more oomph with what they're saying, right? Because in oral culture, everything you say is significant.
Yeah.
So if you just say something and you don't actually back it up with anything, well, no one can trust your word, but your word is all you have. So it's interesting to me, at least, that they require this action. They require some sort of demonstration of what you're saying.
At least a specific word. Because like I said, there's other words.
Right.
And some of them deal more with an inward feeling and some deal more with an outward expression. You can find that it plays into both. And often there's many cases where it is connected to another one of those joy or happy words. And it's saying that they had this and therefore they were doing this, or they were doing this and therefore they had this. And there's kind of this back and forth, this take and pull with the grammar of like these other words. This, like I said, it's not the only word, but I figured we kind of trace the main one, the biggest one, because then it could give us like a better picture of where we're going with this. Just to read a couple more definitions from another set of dictionaries, just kind of paint the picture as we get into passages. Joy, it's a feeling as well as its display. So we also have jubilation, gladness, mirth, joy, gladness, delight, feeling or attitude of joyful happiness and cheerfulness based on like passages like Psalm 51. In some contexts, this is a response to or manifestation of worship to God, and so transcendent even of unfavorable circumstances. Also refers to pleasure, a state of happiness with a focus on sensory input to the body, which gives entertainment to the senses. And so it's interesting that sometimes the joy is deeply connected to Yahweh specifically, and sometimes this joy is in response to something else is going on, and sometimes it is a response in spite of something else is happening, which I think is a really important detail that, there's sometimes where there's joy in spite of something else, or sometimes there's joy in the wrong essence, like being used by other people. They're taking joy in the downfall of people in the wrong, sinful way.
Happy is the one who dashes your little one against the rock.
Now, I only have a few passages pulled up because, like I said, we chased like Simcha specifically. There's 94 different passages. You can get a lot of the same things, but you also can find some good variants in how this word is used. You don't have to really have a lexicon to really get a definition of a word. If you can find what the Hebrew word is, more so over the English word, and you can trace that Hebrew word throughout the Bible, especially because we have digital concordances now, even for free online, you can kind of piece together the context of what the word itself means. Now, if you were to do it with just the English word, you probably could still do that. You might run into some bumps here and there, but it's definitely easier if you went to let's say Blue Letter Bible or Bible Gateway or Bible Hub, which are all free resources. Logos is also free, but it's a software you have to download. You can find the word, you can put in the Hebrew word, and you can trace that Hebrew word.
Right.
And you don't even need a lexicon for it, which I would still recommend it just for deeper study. But if you want to get by without it, you can. So I have a few key passages that I picked out for this. And then we'll look at a couple other words very, very briefly, just to kind of show the other ones that exist. But I just want to focus on about a couple of them, and we don't need to spend so much time on each one. I'll just kind of read through them so you can see how it's used throughout. So the first time we see Simcha specifically is in Deuteronomy 28, verses 47, which reads, because you do not serve Yahweh your God with Simcha and Tuv, which the ESV translate as gladness of heart, Because of the abundance of all things, therefore you shall serve your enemies whom Yahweh will send against you in hunger and thirst and nakedness and lacking everything. And it keeps going. So this condition or this consequence of their lacking of simcha. Now what's interesting though too is the ESV translate tuv as gladness, which is part of tuv's definition, but tuv also refers to the best things and prosperity, happiness, blessing, well-being, the best things, beauty and goodness of value. So it's probably better to say that this is referring to the fact that you did not show joy, you didn't have the simcha, and you didn't do it with the best of your heart. So you did not rejoice the Lord with everything that you have, which could play into gladness. Like it plays into the idea like you didn't have simcha and you didn't have happiness if you want to divide those two. But the idea of like you didn't do it with like the goodness of value or like the best things, prosperity. Like there is no, that you're just kind of like giving a half-baked response, if you will.
You are lukewarm.
Lukewarm. Or what many people speculate about Cain's offering is maybe it wasn't like the best offering.
Right.
Because Abel is so specific that it was the first fruits and Cain was...
Right. And I was going to say, that's kind of where I lean because it was, it was the first of his, right? It's the idea that it is the best of
right.
what he has to offer.
It was the firstborn, if you will, of his stuff. And I think that gladness it still works. It's part of its definition, but is one of those words where it has a little more going for it. And so I think it'd be better to refer to like, because you not serve Yahweh your God with simcha and the best things or the goodness of your heart or the best things of your heart, the blessings of your heart. That kind of plays into the idea of more of it's not just the emotive thing. Like it wasn't like you didn't rejoice in the Lord with happiness. Like you didn't rejoice in him and you didn't give him your best. Like you just kind of shafted him. And I think that kind of paints the better picture of why he's more in this response of you're going to face a consequence for this. Yeah. All right. So another appearance for Simcha appears a lot in the Samuels and the Chronicles. And this is where it's interesting. So in 1 Samuel 18:6, for instance, it says, as they were coming home, when David returned from striking down the Philistine, the women came out all the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines, with songs of Simcha, and with musical instruments. There's a lot of times in like, especially the Chronicles and the Kings and the Samuels, where this Simcha is coming out in this form of shouting and in music. Is for joy over something that has just happened. David has a similar instance with the coming home of the Ark of the Covenant. And there's this idea that it's tied to music and shouting together as well.
Just fully rage baiting the Wesleyans.
Yes, definitely. Really, any of the churches are.
Yeah, Church of Christ.
Yeah. A lot of the ones
Baptists.
are less expression-wise charismatic.
Yeah.
And I don't mean charismatic in the theological, but in the expressive essence. So yeah, you've seen that Simcha plays a lot into these instances where like a victory has come and they're singing in celebration. They're singing in joy. And sometimes they're singing in joy over what the king has done or what this warrior has done, or they're singing joy to the Lord for equipping the king for the thing that he has done. And so you get this nice mixture of all these things. So I have two more examples for just kind of a general looking out for this word. I decided to pull up a passage from Ezra because Ezra's not really talked about a lot.
It's not, and it is legitimately one of the funniest books you will ever read.
And it might be a fun thing to go through someday.
It's so funny.
But so Ezra 3, chapter 12. But many of the priests and Levites and head of fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of this house being laid, though many shouted aloud for Simcha. And then the next verse talks about how they couldn't really distinguish between the Simcha and the weeping because it was just all so loud. Or like the Simcha was louder so you couldn't hear the weeping. And so again, there's moments
to be clear,
of
weeping tears of joy, I imagine.
Yeah.
I was going to say, it wouldn't really make sense that, this great climactic moment that Israel's been looking forward to for a generation is a source of like grief and pain.
Yeah. But it's kind of looking at how Simcha sometimes is tied to Yahweh specifically, and sometimes it's just tied to just responses in general. Like seeing the foundation, this great moment.
Yeah.
Seeing that David has had victory over the Philistines. And then just one more before I kind of get to more of a specific focus. Psalm 4, 6-8. There are many who say, who will show us some good? Lift up the light of your face upon us, O Lord. You have put more simcha in my heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. In peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. And so simcha is something that God instills in people and gives them. It's just a nice wide variety that this word, again, ties to things that are in responses to things that are happening in general, things that God has done, or things God has instilled in people.
Yeah.
Because of his love or his presence or the work he has done.
And the joy that he is.
Exactly.
Simcha.
The simcha, yes. So yeah, you just kind of get a nice variety of usages here. And you kind of see that joy seems to have this tie-in with this inward feeling and this outward expression.
Right, yeah. It's consistently there as a source of celebration.
Yes.
Not a source, an example of, I guess.
It has a source that's causing the inward to pour out in some way. It's kind of like how I've quoted Westhoff before, that creation is an outpouring of the love of the Trinity. Yeah. And so simcha, in its full sense, is there's something that's causing them to have an inward feeling that's pouring out in the way they express it. I'm
just realizing I can never escape Steve Green.
No.
As you were reading Psalm 4, you quoted one of the verses that he does the song about, and now it's just playing in my head. I love my child. I am haunted by Steve Green. Like, I can no longer gripe it. When this actually kind of does tie in a little bit, right? So joy, part of joy is, and perhaps this is better talked about next episode, but part of joy is, where Paul talks about in Philippians 2, do everything without complaining. That song, I will sing that song to myself when I am complaining. It's like, it is a good reminder to be joyful. Because, so to tie it really into this, if your outward expression is complaining, and your outward expression is being miserable, right? Like, that's who I used to be, until I would argue I actually found Christ. Right? Actually, I think it'd be more accurate to say Christ found me, wallowing in my self-hatred and misery. But there should be this outward expression, right? So we talked about, or you've talked about for a little bit now about, this idea of the inward being expressed outwardly. That to me is representative of joy, right? In the modern day, especially. Because joy is more than just a feeling. Even here, it's very clearly more than just a feeling. It's an actual outward expression of it.
If you were to look up rejoice instead of joy, because we kind of think of rejoice as like the outward thing you do.
Sure.
Maybe people don't always say that as much because it feels really religious, and so people don't say that in normal context. But like, even if I did earlier today, I went into logos, I put in rejoice, just kind of messing around with it. Mm-hmm. And it still pulls up joy because they're supposed to be like one the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah, no, and that makes a ton of sense. So rejoicing, I think, is like more the celebration, right, that you get in Ezra, in the Psalms, in Samuel. But I think it's even more so this constant underlying output of happiness, right? Because we talked about how joy and happiness, at least in biblical context, are generally thought of as one and the same.
Yeah, they're deeply tied together.
So,
like, you can't say you're happy if there's no showing of such happiness. Like, you could just be lying about the happiness.
Yeah. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands, But it's kind of funny, but that's actually pretty much what it's saying. Yeah. Right? If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Yeah. Notice I didn't clap. No, I'm kidding.
Okay. Well, stomp your feet.
No, so there is supposed, right? If what you're putting out into the world is complaining, what are people going to think? They're going to think you're miserable.
Yeah.
They're going to think that you don't actually have joy. You don't actually have hope. You don't have happiness. You are not rejoicing in whatever form that looks like. So it's important, yes, to recognize exactly what we've been talking about, which is, what does it mean to have this joy? And what does this joy look like?
Yeah.
But I think it's important to also talk about the opposite. Mm-hmm. What does it look like when you don't have joy? It looks like, and I'm going to say this bluntly because it's what it is. It looks like the people I see around me where they're complaining a lot. There's always something to complain about, right? Like I had a coworker today complain about how much a customer was buying that was breakable. And so you have to wrap breakable items.
Yeah.
And so she was complaining about that. And I just kind of looked at her. And I didn't say anything. I wanted to, but I didn't say anything. And I was like, well, A, that's kind of your job. But B, I understand it can be frustrating.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have a job.
Yeah. It's your job to do it.
Right? It's your job to do it. But also, you have a job. Not everyone does. I have had many times in my life where I've been looking for a job and I have not been able to find one. So that's why whenever I do find myself complaining about the work that I'm doing, even if I am, commiserating with a coworker, I will say, but hey, I got a job and I have means to provide for myself and my family.
Yeah.
That is a huge blessing, right? It's that mentality of joy, of constantly putting out this, I'm not saying always be smiling.
Yeah.
There are times
No,
when
I
Jesus
appreciate the
wasn't.
caveat that you put in there. Like the opposite version that you're proposing is that of complaining, not of like sadness and like,
Right.
and like going through something difficult. Like you're going to go through moments where you're not happy and you're going to go through like hard moments. And that is not therefore a sin if you're like sad or whatever. But it's the idea of like taking for granted the good things that are around you, other things that God has blessed you with.
Exactly.
And the thing, or even his presence, and rejecting that and rather focus on complaining. It plays into so much what Paul talks about, where like they very much had the idea that you can, one, capture your thoughts, which is hard for us to do, but capturing your thoughts. And it's a command to rejoice and to be thankful and to be loving. And these are all things that we kind of treat that are merely emotions that are a response into something. But Paul is treating it like it's something that you can control. But even then, he goes through hard times. Right. And you can tell that he's frustrated. Like he's angry in some of his letters. He's sad in some of his letters. 2 Corinthians 12. David is like depressed and in fear. And God allows him to write those things. Yeah. Because it's not saying the hard times will happen, but the idea of like turning it into grumbling and complaining. I appreciate that was the opposite that you provided.
And I think a great example of that is the book of Lamentations. Right? There is a mourning. There is a weeping. There is a sadness. But there, underneath it all, and it comes out strongest in chapter 3, before then going back to being depressing pain. It's the meme of Andre Braugher where he's just, hey. But there is that moment of chapter 3 of there is underlying joy here. There is. It may not be much, right, in terms of what's being put out,
but it's something.
It's still there, right? So that's the thing about joy that makes it different from the modern concept we have of happiness. It doesn't go away. Joy, even in difficult moments, is still there. It may not be necessarily the thing that you are expressing at that exact moment, but joy is still there. It is still part of you.
And let's think about, too, the idea that God, which we'll get into in the next section, as like the source and presence of joy. He also grieves. He also is angry. Right. So it's obviously not a sin to be in a state other than happiness, but it's in a state where you're purposefully rejecting the ability to be joyful and you're taking for granted or rejecting the blessings of God or complaining or all the very like different circumstances we could talk about that are not like you actually like Jesus weeping because a friend has passed, right, or he's seeing the causation of sin and it hits him deeply within his person. Right. Or you see with God talking about don't grieve the spirit with sin, or how he's lamenting over Adam and Eve post the fall. We see that there is God gave us emotions as a response. He's not saying you can only be happy, but it's the idea of like that willful choosing, even if it's subconscious, to reject, to take joy in opportunities that you have, like at work. Like I remember, like even at teaching, there's times where I find myself complaining, but I could be rejoicing in the fact that God has provided me with a job in my field, in an area that, one, if there's a shortage in our area, but they have very little reason to consider me because I'm a first year. But yet he provides a position where I can do that. That is something to take joy in. And the kids there should be able to get that demonstration of joy, because the true source for you and me and for most of our listeners would be in Christ and what he has done. And just in Yahweh. I love when one professor said that he sometimes has a problem with saying, he says, I know it's going to sound splitting hairs. He's like, but I do have a problem sometimes when people say that God deserves all of our worship or something like that. And he said the reason is that even if Christ didn't do what he did, he's still deserving of it. He's never not deserving of it. He's deserving of more than just all of our worship. He's deserving of everything, because no matter what, he doesn't have to save us.
Right.
So we shouldn't be just praising him simply because Jesus came. He's been worthy of that before he even spoke a word into creation. Mm-hmm. He just always has been. And he's like, I understand it's not like I'm splitting hairs, But we have to have the right mentality of understanding that God has always been worthy of everything and is not just because of something that Jesus done. And we should worship it because of what Jesus has done. But that's not the only reason. That's not the source of it, because we have people rejoicing even here in the Old Testament before Jesus has done anything, or people rejoicing even before the Exodus or before other things. And there's people who are also rejecting it. But the idea of that he is the source of those things, that he should be our focus in all things, that we should be grateful for things we have. But again, doesn't mean that you won't have hard times and therefore is wrong to be sad. Our Savior literally wept. Holy Spirit is described as grieving over sin. The Father is described as being angry with sin, or just Yahweh himself as being angry with sin. There's still this personal being, and some of those attributes of like emotion responses have been instilled in us. But Paul, obviously by the Holy Spirit, and Jesus talks about how there's a level of you can have control over some of those things, and when you're not being in control of those things, when you're just lashing out, or you're just flying away with your tongue and complaining, you're not controlling your tongue. Those things, not only can they distance you from God because you're effectively saying that what he's done for you is not good enough, or whatever, like you're kind of like putting this divider, but also like even as a natural world, if your boss hears you complain, there's a chance that he might just let you go if you complain in the wrong essence. Like there's still going to be consequences for those things, and you have control over those things. Now, you not have control over when you cry necessarily, but you have control over the words you say and how you use them. And that plays heavily into this idea of joy. All right, so I have 3 psalm passages for this next little bit that
Pull up my Septuagint.
Play really into this idea. We've already kind of been alluding to
Psalms. Oh no,
we've already been alluding to this, so I don't think we need to dwell too much in here. But I think it plays into what we just kind of talked about, and that is the idea that Simcha in the presence of God, or God is the source of Simcha. So I have 3 different psalms right now because I think that we kind of get the point with these 3. You can keep doing, there's so much more you can do with this, but I think these 3 just kind of cover the point, at least for now, for this episode. So, Psalm 16:11.
Okay, so I need to go to Psalm 15.
Yes, if you're joining in, you weren't here for the Chaos Water series.
Ironic, because it was chaos.
Caleb had the discovery that some of the numbering in the Septuagint is different than the Hebrew. And so it was really funny watching him scramble trying to find some of these passages.
Well, yeah, because I'm reading it in the Greek and Josh is reading it in the English. And I'm like, this is not the same verse. This is so not the same verse.
So, okay. So since you're mentioning the Greek, I don't remember off the top of my head if this specific word is here, but actually, sorry, it is in Psalm 4, verse 8, which we already kind of read through, but I'll kind of share here because you're kind of looking at it right now. So they have, it's translated, at least in my Septuagint, as cheerfulness. But okay, I'm gonna make sure I get this right.
You got this.
Euphrosune is like the root.
Yes.
Or as some of the other versions I heard, because they choose the other pronunciations.
Yes.
It was ephrosinin.
You see,
You don't like that?
No, I don't, because it's the diphthong does not
but it was
work like that. It was a really fun fact, and it ties in. This is where we get the word euphoria.
Yes. And this is the common word that is used in place of simcha in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
You don't get kara, which we're going to see next week, but this is the one that is frequently used for simcha, which I thought was kind of interesting. But here is translated as cheerfulness. So God as a source. Psalm 16:11 was one example I have. In your presence, there is fullness of simcha. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. So we get this idea of the presence of just in his mere presence, there is this fullness of joy. At anything outside of his presence is a lacking of joy, which is interesting too, because if you study the temple or mountains, which we're going to be doing very soon, but there's the idea that to truly be in God's presence was to be in the tabernacle and the Holy of Holies when he is there, but people weren't allowed to be in there. If he was dwelling there, they weren't really allowed in. And if he If they were allowed in, it was when he wasn't there, or it was like that one time a year the high priest could go in. Or like prophets would be called up to the mountain, to that spot where they would engage in some kind of manifestation.
Yeah.
Not even just like the visions, like Mount Sinai, being up there, and he's like manifesting himself in a way.
Mount Carmel, Elijah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Versus like Elijah's vision of Yahweh,
Yeah.
which is going to be different than the actual manifestation,
yes.
a presence of sorts. And so, yeah, but this idea of this being in his presence, this psalm is written by David. And you know, David doesn't really go into those places, like the Holy of Holies or the high mountains, where like you're talking about like the presence of God, but he's still talking about being in God's presence still. And that is his source of the fullness of Simcha. That the full idea of Simcha comes from being in his presence. And anything outside of that is a sheer lacking of, or is not, maybe you might still have joy, but it's not the fullness of Simcha. It's not it in its fullest sense. And there is kind of like the idea of like, you can't truly experience love outside of God. Like there's all these things that are tied to like things that you can experience in some level, but they're inferior in comparison to actually being in God's presence, being in a relationship with him, being in those Eden spots with him, whether they be like representative wise or the actual thing itself. There's a severe lacking of, and that he is the source of it. It even says that at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. You know, like at the right hand, which often refers to like this royal and power position. It's like even right there, there's pleasure in that. The fact that his power, his royalty is a source of pleasure. To just be in that throne room, to be in that presence of the King, of the God of the universe, is joyful. We also have Psalm 21:6, for you make him most blessed forever. You make him glad with the simcha of your presence. Again, here we see that is God who makes someone blessed. It is God who makes someone glad. It is God who provides the presence of simcha. It is in that presence that there is cheerfulness, that there is joy, there is this expression, that the true idea of that inner feeling that can be expressed outwardly comes from being in his presence. Why are you dying?
So you read Psalm 21:6,
Yes.
right? For those keeping along with the Septuagint, you're going to be real confused. It is Psalm 20, right? So we do still have to subtract 1. It is also verse 7, because I read verse 6 and went, that Joshua is not what that says.
Yeah, so another thing that you might not have known, Septuagint counts as the verse differently.
Yeah.
Sometimes they include the title as a verse, and sometimes it does not. In this case,
It's wild.
it did. Whereas the Hebrew English version did not count it.
Yeah.
So you gotta be watching where those numbers are.
Well, because you read the verse and I was like, this verse 6 talks extensively about glory.
Yeah.
And he did not mention that.
No, I did not. Now that we got that figured out, I'll read one more. And then if you have any thoughts from like what you're looking at the Septuagint, feel free to chime in. But Psalm 43:4, then I'll go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding simcha, and I will praise you with the lyre, O God, my God. And now we have that God is the source of his exceeding simcha. And it's what is going to do is going to cause him to praise him with music. So before we kind of saw how simcha was the result of that joy, and it was being done in music, and now we're seeing it as like a source for that musical playing, for that outward expression. And so that's why I kind of mentioned you kind of have this back and forth between the two and how they're interchangeable or deeply connected together. All right, now Caleb, that you're still dying over there with your facial expressions, do you have thoughts from the Greek that you want to add to this based on the Septuagint?
Can you read the verse one more time, please?
Yes. Then I'll go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding simcha, and I'll praise you with the lyre, O God, my God.
So it's interesting here in the Greeks. We have kai eseletsumai prosto, thusias theorion tu theu pros ton theon ton euphrianonta tain neoteta mu. Nowhere in there is the word exceeding. That is left out entirely. So that would be like, for example, and I will go to the altar of God, to God who gladdens or gives joy in my youth. That would be better. Gives joy in my youth. There is no exceeding there.
Okay, so here's a little Hebrew. This is another one of our joy words. Its root is gil. It has 8 appearances, and it refers also to gladness, exceeding joy, this other tying into rejoicing. Or to pull this up over here is rejoice, be glad, be joyful, be in a state of an attitude or feeling of favorable circumstances. This joy may be expressed in song, shouts, or even joyous shrieks and calls. Note some translations, such as in Psalm 2:11, will do it as tremble.
Interesting.
So gil, exceeding is a fine choice here. Is referring, and they're kind of emphasizing the strength of how gil is being used here with the word exceeding in the ESV. This idea that it is this emotion that is deeply pouring out in some way with music, with the shouting, this loud noise, with this idea of exulting or joy or gladness, that there is this deep, strong outward expression of it.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm a little sad, honestly, that the Greek doesn't quite convey the same thing. That it feels, which would have been appropriate given the time period, it feels a little more stoic, honestly.
Sure.
Like there's definitely still that sense that you're talking about, but it's nowhere near as explicit. It's more of a, God is the source of my joy, which is true, but it's not, he's exceeding joy, right? This idea of, all-consuming joy.
Yeah.
It's just more of a general positive feeling.
This source of where you can't even just say you feel joy, but it just bursts out of you.
Right. That's completely missing.
Yeah.
I mean, not completely missing, but it's nowhere near as included.
It's not as strong of a point. This idea that
thank you.
Not only is it just an outward pouring of joy, but this shouting, this strong emotive expression of gladness, of joy, exaltation in some way towards the Lord is what kind of what gil gets into. And again, is not really commonly used. This specific form of the word, it only appears 8 times, but it still kind of adds that little bit of weight to it, into this idea of it's bursting out of you. All right, so we're going to turn towards a last example that uses 2 different words for joy. Just kind of want to throw these ones out there. And one of the things that take joy in, which is going to also tie into an upcoming series we're going to be doing in our live streams, as well can tie a little bit, actually not even just a little bit, a lot of it, into our Greek episode. And so that's going to be Psalm 105, verse 43. We have 2 different words here instead of simcha and gil. And I just think that this is kind of interesting. So I also have definitions for them in here as well, and how many times they're used within the Hebrew, if you're wanting to check those out. So Psalm 105, verse 43. So he, which is Yahweh in this context, brought his people out with sason, his chosen ones with rinna. Rinna. It's a double N. It's interesting. So you, if you want to be a little nerdy regarding the Hebrew grammar, you're going to see one noon, but it has a hard dagesh, which means the consonant is in there twice. So
I actually knew that.
Yeah. So we have the rin na is in there.
I forgot about dageshes. That was the one part of Hebrew that made sense to me.
Yeah, the soft and hard dagesh.
Yeah. It's funny because it's a little bit reminiscent of breathing in Greek.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of why it made sense to me.
Yeah, because it impacts either, so if it's a hard dagesh, it impacts how many consonants are, if it's 2 or 1, and that depends on the previous consonant, if there is a consonant or not, and a variety of other things. And then if it's part of the God Kafet, I think it was, which is a set of Hebrew consonants that if it has a dagesh, it's pronounced with one sound. If it's lacking, if it has a different sound. So they both play into sound, but one plays into a double pronunciation of a certain letter, and then a soft dagesh plays into if it's a different variation. So a bait would be either a b or a v, if there is or isn't a dagesh. One could also be t or th, if there is or isn't a a Dagesh. Okay, third time over.
Yeah.
Okay, so, but in here we have Sason and we have Rin Na, or Rin Na, technically, not even just in. So, just to kind of provide some definitions for these. So, Sason refers to joy and jubilation, is an expression again, exaltation, state of happiness with a focus on making sounds and expressions of joy. So Sason, so before we saw with Simcha that it can be a source or be an expression of shouting, Sason is pretty much more focused on an outward vocal expression in some format. So we have he being Yahweh brought his people out with Sason. So they're coming out with vocal shouting, with vocal singing. As we see even like when they cross the Sea of Reeds, we have the song in Exodus 15 that they're singing about what God has just done. And you see this in other places. There's like a song of Moses, a song of Miriam, and a variety of other places. And this word has 22 appearances with its Hebrew construction. Rin na refers to the basic meaning of the root is assumed to be a loud, resounding cry, which can embrace a sense of jubilation as well as that of a lament. So it can be referring to jubilation, rejoicing, or it could be referring to a cry of lament and wailing. It can also be referred to singing, the making of joyful music with the voice and words. A pleading cry that communicates a request for something, or a shout of loud communication of a message, or even finally pride with a legitimate reason for rejoicing in a particular state or object. And this is 32 occurrences. So both of these are vocal specific joys. One has a caveat of it can be used in a positive or a negative light. Like it has a variety of lights, but especially like the idea of you could be wailing, like something negative has happened or something great has happened and you're shouting. Either way, it's a very loud vocal response.
Yeah.
And then the other one is that this is a vocal response often tied with singing and shouting of some sort. So again, Simcha, you could tie it to a vocal, like musical expression. Sason is very much tied towards a musical expression. And then Rin Na, it's very much a loud cry of some sort, whether it be positive or negative, or even shouting with like begging of some kind of response in some way. And so we put that in there. So Yahweh brought his people out with loud songs, his chosen ones with shouting of joy, and this very loud expression, which again ties into the idea of what we're talking about. Like these start with an inward feeling that is pouring out in some way. It's hard to really say that you have this kind of joy if there is no outward expression of it, which I think we just kind of said this so many times. I don't want to feel like we're belaboring the point, but it's one of those things where you can't say that you have the joy. If we were to say based on the Hebrew words that we've talked about here right now, talk about the joy of the Lord, it is hard to say you have the joy of the Lord if there's no outward expression of it.
Right.
It is really hard to make that case. Now, part of that, as you mentioned, is due to the oral culture versus ours is more of a literary culture. So we kind of view things differently. But if we were to, based on the Hebrew definitions, this kind of joy is something that is pouring out of you in some kind of way that people are going to hear about it.
Right. Yeah, and yes, it is a little tougher for us, but I think it's still very much the case that, you know, we have the phrase actions speak louder than words.
Of course, yeah.
Right. And that you could pretty much trace that back to scripture.
Yeah.
And, you know, you shall know them by their fruits, and then, and even back to this idea. So what's funny is that, you know, much like truth, joy seems to be pervading culture. Right. And that is, it's not just limited to the one culture of the Jews in this case and their understanding, but it's an eternal understanding, right? Because God is the eternal source of joy. There's nothing really that interesting in the Greek. It's
no words missing this time.
No, it's pretty much dead on same.
See, there's many, many more verses you could go through. These are just a few verses for anyone wants to go through and find these words. You can just click on it. I think Bible Gateway has this function, I think.
Yes, it does.
I know for a fact Blue Letter Bible and Bible Hub does have these functions. Again, my preference is going to be Logos. I like it. I understand for some people it's a little difficult to figure out at first, but that's a pretty good resource, also free. Again, you don't need a lexicon to kind of figure stuff out. You can trace these ideas as you're reading through it. The lexicon is going to be helpful in analyzing those passages and putting words to a definition, or even providing extra biblical texts where those words are used culturally to help provide further definitions. So definitely would recommend a lexicon, but it's not like you need it. You can simply just do this. I would definitely recommend tracing the original word over the English, because if you just trace the English, one, you're going to get significantly less appearances. But two, you're going to be seeing a lot of different expressions, and sometimes they overlap still, and sometimes they don't. And we want to be able to have a nice, consistent understanding. And so with the keyword of today would be Simcha, again, 94 appearances, Semach with 154, and Samech with 21. But then, like, that's just one root.
Right.
You could trace also like the Sason or the Rina, or if you want to do something really short, the Gil.
Mm-hmm.
You can trace all of those, and they all play into the vocabulary. And it's interesting because they don't all share the roots, but they're a similar focus on a topic. I remember being blown away by this comment in a book I read a few months ago, Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes. And I talked about it with a friend of ours after a youth event a couple days ago. And it just, this one of these messages and it just kind of stuck with me, that you can tell how much a culture values something, or like a topic or a concept, based on how many words they have to describe it. For us, what our friend was talking about, we were talking about like how we have a lot of words regarding time.
True.
We have a lot of words for time. We kind of treat time also as like a thing that you can exchange, like it's a value, like a currency. For them, like in Greek, you have multiple words for love. In English, we really have one. We have different like adjectives you throw onto it, but still one word. So we don't really seem to really emphasize love in the same way.
Something to be said there, but yeah.
And then, but like even here with joy, you can tell that joy is something of importance because they have so many different ways, many different words tied to it. And some of them are very similar in definition, but some of them have a certain nuance to it that the other ones don't have. Like Gil has that really deep connection to a exceeding expression, or with Rina being something that's tied to just is a loud response that could be in positive or in negative. And then you tie that with some of these other words, such as the Simcha and the other roots that tie into it. It's not going to be like caught in there forever, but like you could tell there was a lot of, this was one of the concepts that really mattered a lot to them. As a word itself of like, if we were putting English joy, because there's so many different ways that they describe it or express it. And it tied deeply to God being the source of it. And they would look back on the Exodus as something they rejoiced in. And we're going to see like in the New Testament with our couple of projects coming up that joy is in the Exodus that Jesus has gone through and that he's bringing us through.
Right.
Through the gospel. And how those narratives tie together in the same way. But yeah, this is a taste of what you can find with the Hebrew regarding joy. So much more could be said. I feel like we might just belabor the point, knowing us. Probably smarter people have other deeper conversations about it.
Significantly smarter people. Yes.
Significantly. But we're going to get into the Greek next time, tracing kara, which interestingly enough is not the word that's used in parallel to this one. I find that interesting. No. But we'll get into that next week. And then that'll be it for joy.
Yeah, I'll have thoughts about it, I guess, because I was going to say it might be just, that change of culture over time and what it came to mean, but I'll have to look into it.
So that'll be next week, and then that'll be it for joy. I think we're just doing 3 parts, unless we spawn with the idea we should do a 4th episode. But I hope you guys enjoyed this little journey. I kind of went in order of like appearances in terms of like canonically. I see you. I know. Enjoy. I know. Caleb, do your regular closer.
Well, it would bring us phenomenal joy if you would let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Let us know in what ways that we can be praying for you to experience more joy. And of course, the thing that brings you the most joy in the world is liking and subscribing to the channel. Helps us out greatly, and you will continue to get fantastic content and hear our mellifluous tones. With all that said, Lord willing, we'll see you in the next episode. Bye, guys.